So they met, some of them talked, some did not, some hesitated to express their opinion. And the following day...
Oh, good afternoon. Excellency, Madame Mansour, distinguished guests, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Dorset Historical Society to the Dorset Public Library. My name is John Mathewson. I'm the curator over there. And we're in for a treat today as we're entering into a relationship with finding out, envisioning agricultural policies worldwide in the future. And before Ambassador speaks, I just have a few things to do as prologue about the history of agriculture in Vermont. I did not bring my 200-page version. I brought my under 5-minute version. But we look around us today at the Vermont landscape, and as you all probably know, the landscape did not always look as it did. When the Mohicans were in the territory 250 years ago to 10,000 years ago, they had sustainable agricultural practices, which in this area meant some cleared lands and also hunting grounds and fishing grounds. Emerald Lake and even the marsh. Here there are records of those being harvested. But 250 years ago, when the European settlers came, that all changed, which has set Vermont up in a unique position for experimenting with sustainable agriculture. At first, the settlers came, chopped down a lot of the trees, burnt the trees to make potash, which was important for pewter making. And that's how they first made that was their first cash crop, as it were. And then in the new fields, they planted grains, primarily wheat. And the wheat was going great. Vermont became the breadbasket of New England for the first 28 years of the 19th century until, because there was no field rotation, the soils were depleted. But then even worse, there were two invasive insects. We think of invasive plants and things today, and insects today. They were around in 1828 as well, when the Hessian fly, and for those of you keeping Latin score, the Meatiola destructor, and the wheat midge, Pseudoplosis mosolana, came and wiped out the crops.
Oh, wow.
So the farmers needed to adapt. They needed to change. They needed to find out what's next. And luckily, in 1809, William Jarvis, the U.S. consul to Portugal, illegally imported Spanish merino sheep to Vermont, to his farm in Wethersfield. And the sheep farming kind of grew for a while, but then when it was really needed as a new crop, that's when farmers picked it up. And so in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, merino sheep dotted the hillsides everywhere. An interesting side note, all of the other farmers who couldn't make it as wheat farmers, they sold their land and moved west to farm there. But the sheep farmers bought up all the smaller farms in order to make that happen, because they needed more land to graze their sheep. By the Civil War, though, enough good land had opened up out west that the sheep moved out there. You know, big, vast, open, flat land is better for sheep grazing than craggy mountainsides. So they had to come up with the next plan, and they switched over to Holstein cows. Those are the black and white cows that you see all over. Before that, the most popular cows in Vermont were Devon cows, the red cows, reddish-brown cows. But they did not produce milk as much as the Holsteins did. So Holsteins took over, but you can't ship milk. You can't get milk from Vermont to Boston or New York easily then. So they had to turn it into cheese. So cheese factories popped up all over Vermont, another agricultural change. There were about 2 in every town. There were 2 in Dorset, two in Middletown Springs, 2 in Wells, I think 3 in Paulet. They were all over the place, making hundreds and hundreds of pounds of cheese that got shipped out. Then around 1900, refrigerated rail cars came in. So the cheese factories closed down. Creameries opened up in every town. And milk was shipped out. And milk became, for the first part of the 20th century, that primary product. By the end of the 20th century, because of change from milk cans, you know, those cute little milk cans you see everywhere, to bulk containers, a lot of smaller farms went out of business. It was no longer viable to support a family on a herd of 30 cows. And so a lot of dairy farmers went out of business. And then to replace that, people started getting into organic agriculture and diversified agriculture, different plants, specialized things. So now you have llama farms, emu farms, deer farms for venison all around Vermont. You've got vegetable farmers, you've got the rebirth of farmers markets, and more small-scale, localized agriculture. So the history of Vermont has been one of change, and it's been a laboratory for this change. And we're in one of those changes right now. And maybe some of the lessons that we've learned can be adapted for a global market. And so I'm going to turn this over now to Yvonne.
Thanks so much, John.
Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce our visiting ambassador. So Excellency again, and Madam Mansour, and our wonderful attendees. On behalf of the GRACE Initiative and the Yale Alum Nonprofit Alliance and the Dorset Village Public Library and the Dorset Historical Society, we are so pleased that that you have come here. And I also would like to thank so much again the Village Library, Dorset Village Library, and the Dorset Historical Society. And also thank you so much to Jeanette for coming here today and filming this. So it will be available throughout the world because I think it will go on YouTube. So it goes way beyond Dorset. I would like to give just a brief bio on our distinguished guest today. Dr. Riyad Mansour was born in a refugee family that lived in the city of Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. In 1967, Ambassador Mansour started his college education in the United States, and he completed his PhD here as well. And since his youth, he has always been involved in Palestinian politics and began his career as a Palestinian in the Palestinian Diplomatic Service in 1983 with the Permanent Observer Mission of the Palestine Liberation Organization to the UN. He was appointed ambassador and permanent observer of Palestine to the UN, and since November 2012, he has been ambassador and permanent observer of the State of Palestine to the UN. I was there the day that vote took place in the General Assembly. Dr. Mansour is also the non-resident ambassador of the State of Palestine to Costa Rica and to the Dominican Republic. He completed his graduate work in Youngstown State University, and he also was a teaching assistant at the University of Akron prior to his diplomatic career. So thank you so much, Ambassador Mansour. We are very grateful that you were able to come here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Do you want me to sit or to stand or to do both? Okay.
Whatever makes you comfortable.
Well, thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, John. Also, I want to thank the library for hosting us here and the organizers of this event for making it a happening event. And also, I want to thank all of you for being with us. And I'm delighted that for those who love gender balance, we have much more women than men in this room, so that this is a good signal, you know, about how progressive the state of Vermont is. So congratulations, you know, it's not 50-50. It looks to me like it's closer to 80 or maybe more
90.
women, 90 to 10%, which is a good sign. Of course, one of my predecessors as the chair of the Group of 77 on China, which is a grouping of countries in the United Nations of 135 countries today, in which 80% of humanity reside in these 135 countries. Ambassador Varashai of Thailand came, I believe, to this area twice in the past, and he started a process or a tradition of chairs of the Group of 77 in China to come to Vermont to learn from your experience, to engage you in a discussion about a valuable issue of mutual interest. Of course, for us in the Group of 77 in China, in which the countries that we represent are known as the countries of the South, which means they're not as prosperous as European countries, the United States, Canada, Japan, the countries of the North. But we are very much eager to try to expedite the process of our development and to try to learn from other experiences, and here we're talking about Vermont, in very important fields, fields of technology to improve agricultural production, and also fields of experiences in new methods of dealing with agriculture, whether it is organic agriculture or new methods of dealing with agriculture, in which you are a pioneering state. We listened from John to the history of agriculture in your state, and before coming to you, I met with another gentleman in which he said, you lost millions of trees about 100 years ago because of the processes that existed in your history then, but when you tried to reverse the process and planted millions of trees, now the Vermont of today looks extremely different than Vermont of about 100 years ago, which is something wonderful. And in many of our countries, there is a problem that we are facing known as desertification, which means that many countries in our group of countries, once upon a time they used to have more trees, more vegetation, but because of many reasons, including industrialization and urbanization, they started losing trees, and desertification started creeping at a faster, pace, especially in sub-Sahara Africa. And that created many problems for these countries, including the problem of food insecurity. Africans in the past, they used to cultivate food from their own fields, and they never faced the issue of food insecurity. But because they thought that after independence from colonialism and moving in the direction of industrialization and urbanization, they can grow their economies fast. It did not work to a great extent, but in the meanwhile, they lost the productivity of their land, and they started buying food at an expensive rate from Europe and other countries, so that they did not feed themselves and they did not progress as much as they like to progress. So these are some of the issues that we face. Now, at the United Nations, our group is a leading group in negotiating agreements and common positions of all nations on issues that are of extreme importance to all of us. And we reached a contract by the year 2015 known as the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, starting from eradication of poverty, through, issues that are extremely important to climate change. And these goals and targets are known today as Agenda 2030 in the United Nations, which means that by the year 2030, we want to accomplish all these objectives that we have negotiated, all nations at the United Nations, and agreed of what needs to be done and how to do it, and the resources that are needed in order to implement this plan and to accomplish it by the year 2030. This plan, as I said, it's a contract between the 135 countries and the rest of nations from the north, which each country has a responsibility to carry in order to implement the 2030 agenda. 2030 agenda cannot be implemented by advices given to the 135 countries, our countries, from those others who might have, ideas and suggestions. It doesn't work that way. The way it works, that we agreed of how to accomplish these objectives, and we agreed that each country has a responsibility to fulfill in order to implement this agreement. So if you have more advanced technology in the north, we cannot implement these goals without transferring some of that technology to the countries of the south. If you pollute more in the north and create this disaster for all of us, for humanity, known as climate change, through the increase of the emission of CO2 and therefore increasing the temperature of Earth to close to 2 and possibly maybe 3 centigrade, which would lead to the melting of the glaciers on the North Pole and the South Pole, which could lead to the increase of the level of water on the seas and oceans by 1 or 2 meters, that conceivably would lead to the drowning of so many island states and drowning areas that are adjacent to the coast, because in the coast there are about 35% of the population of the world live within such areas of the islands and the coastal areas of many continents. So therefore, we agreed that it requires, as an example, of $100 billion annually in order to deal with issues related to adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation for the island states, which island states and least developed countries, most of them are in Africa, constitute about 1/3 of our group. About 50 plus countries out of the 135 countries. So for them, in order to be able to survive the effect that was caused by others, not by them, of the pollution, the increase of temperature, and the threat of drowning, then those who are causing this problem, it makes a lot of sense that they should come up with the resources in order to help, for example, some of these island states to have levees and to have all the details of what is known as adaptation, so that they do not drown as a result of the negative effect of climate change as a result of what we are doing to it through the emissions and all the other things that we are doing to change the climate in a severe way than the way it was before. So these are some elements of the agreement that we reached collectively, and therefore by the year 2020, which is next year, each and every country is supposed to step up to the plate and to shoulder its responsibility to try collectively to save humanity, to save Earth, and therefore to save all of us. Because if we do not save Earth, we will destroy it with our own hands. And since this issue is an existential issue for all of us, the Secretary General of the United Nations decided to have an emergency summit in September in New York this year to discuss what needs to be done, because we exhausted the discussion of what needs to be done. We know what needs to be done. We've established the framework of what needs to be done. And what we need to do is to have the political will to have action and to provide the resources necessary in order to implement the framework that we agreed to do collectively. These are some of the issues that we deal with. We are interested in Vermont because of your unique experience. So we hope that we can bring larger number of ambassadors from our group to visit your state in the month of August. Hopefully we will visit enough number of institutions of caliber of universities to be exposed to some of your experiences in the field of research methodology as it relates to the issues that are of extreme concern to us. And also to visit enough enterprises and institutions in the field of agriculture, whether related to organic or new methods, as your experience is showing that your experience with agriculture is an evolving experience. So this is what we're planning to do, and we are grateful for your generosity to receive us, to meet with us, and to make these experiences available to us so that we can engage you and to see how we can learn from your experience and share with you some of our issues and concerns for the common benefit of us trying to improve our own situations and for the progress of our economies and development, and also for partnering with Vermont if there are things that Vermont can learn from us or from some of us. We will not hesitate to make it available to you, because in partnership it goes both ways. We know that you are much more advanced than many of our countries, but nevertheless some of our countries are advanced in their own unique way, that they could also share with you such experience. That is the major presentation as it relates to my work as the chair of the Group of 77 on China. If you want to talk about the political situation in the Middle East, you can ask me questions about that, and I will be more than happy to respond to those questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm really not from Vermont. I'm from Massachusetts and from Florida. Last winter in Florida, a friend of mine who is more leaning towards, let's not say. She asked me if I would accompany her to this group in Florida, and it's called the ECHO movement. And they are church-based. I do not know what church, but definitely they're church-based. And they go to different parts of Africa, and they implement these things: how to purify water, how to bring water to the field, how to change the agriculture from one area, how to rotate crops, really. And I was very impressed with what they're trying to do. Have you ever heard of this group?
Well, there are many groups like this
Like
that
that?
do exist.
Church-based, I guess.
Yes.
Or-
Well, there are church-based, there are community-based, there are activist-based. There are many people who would like really to help in many fields. President Carter has an organization
He does.
that goes to many countries of the South, especially after disasters, of rebuilding dwellings and houses for them, shelters, and to help people to cope with catastrophes and problems. So there are many of these experiences. So you were impressed
I
theoretically.
was impressed with
Did
what
you
they're
did you
doing.
go with them and practice it
No.
to be further impressed?
Of course not.
Why
I'll
not?
help my grandson who's in Maine, and he's trying to do this
I
on
see.
his piece of land, but no.
No, but these things do exist, and this is the nature of cooperation between people and humans. And this idea of cooperation existed from long time ago, including the migration of people. This is an old phenomena that existed with the, with the existence of man. Civilization, we were told, started in the middle of Africa.
Yeah.
And people moved with rivers and with prosperity and migrated to other places, to Mesopotamia, to other parts. Even they walked across Asia over when Alaska was connected from Asia with the North America, and came people to North America, to South America, and people were always traveling back and forth, bringing things with them from one place to another place in terms of crops. These are good things as part of our heritage as human beings. So today, for those who are trying to stop immigrants from coming from other parts to, for example, here or Europe, this is not congruent with the tradition of humanity. In fact, this country was built on the shoulders of immigrants from Europe and other places. So what was good, for the United States over the years should be good for everyone over the years as well. I know that between World War I and World War II, 50 million immigrants came from Europe, from Asia, from Africa to the United States of America, and made it the giant country with all these resources and capabilities. So then migration and going from one place to another place, and if you are capable to go to Africa for a few months and be impressed further with all these things,
I've been to
by all
Africa
means.
on trips, but not with this group.
Okay.
A photographic safari.
Yes.
Well, I totally admire the kind of organization that you and your G77 plus China are trying to organize. But you mentioned the word population, and when I think about the early people who began to become agriculturalists and so on, they were very small scale, and it was only as population increased that they had to make major changes in their organization that involved the kind of bureaucracies that we sort of try to get away from. And one of the appealing parts of Vermont is the small scale nature of the way things work here, and that an individual can change his fields to some other product and so on. So I was just wondering how, I love the idea of small scale agriculture, the idea of taking what we have in Vermont, say, and bringing it to some other location. But there are large population issues, increased population. So how do we go from these hands-on activities that we have here, or that you can bring to us from someplace, to heavily populated areas where you have large numbers of people involved in all of this? I mean,
Well, I cannot, pretend to tell you that I have solution to all these complicated issues, because I don't. But what we have is that we will bring, hopefully, representatives from big countries and small countries, and to expose them to your experience. For any country, regardless of their size, if they see valuable lessons that they can benefit from in their own countries, by all means, we will be delighted that we were part of providing them with that experience. If a representative from a large country, let's say such as India, with 1 billion people. And some people that will be, engaging with us in a discussion over an issue like yours, then it would be very interesting to listen to what the representative of India would say. My job is to provide you with the opportunity to have people who are more qualified than me in addressing some of these very specific issues as of how do you have some relationship between the big and the small, between the one that wants to keep things small and between the one that want to address issues of big. So that the wonderful thing is we will have a discussion of that kind with people who have such qualifications. What the answer will be, I don't know. It will be based on that kind of conversation, and if anything, to be followed up with that conversation. If some of the people in this region that are interested in how to deal with the relationship with big countries and they are really interested in pursuing it with a country like India, then I'm sure that they will pursue it. Our objective is to try to move as much as we can from the theoretical concept of cooperation on these issues into the practical aspect of how everyone can benefit, the small, the big, the in-between size, because this is the whole essence of cooperation. How can we help each other? And you are not doing me a favor if you are more advanced than me in technology and resources when you help me. You do it because this is how humans do things. Once upon a time you were vulnerable and small. Somebody helped you. And now if I am small and vulnerable and you are bigger and you have more resources, you should be extremely gratified that you are helping me. This is the nature of humans. I don't want to discuss it from religious point of view, but even from religious point of view, this is what we were told to do. Help your neighbors, help your others, and because helping is a good thing to do. And we need, that's in terms of helping, but also in terms of avoiding catastrophes. Not a single country can do it alone. We have to do it all collectively, such as climate change. And we need to do it all together in order really to save this fabulous planet that it happened by accident that all of us live here. And we are increasing the number. Maybe the number is getting smaller in Vermont, but in India and China, the number is getting to be so huge. And in other places, it's getting to be huge. All of us are in this same vehicle together in the planet Earth. And it is our collective responsibility to save it. And if we are reckless and irresponsible, we could very easily destroy it with our own hands, with the bad things that we do. Yes, ma'am.
So recent studies have come out kind of saying that choices made on the individual level regarding climate change will have a small but mostly insignificant effect on the larger issue, and that the main perpetrators of climate change are these big corporations and these big businesses and oil, and those are the things that are kind of pushing climate change forward. And I guess my question is, how do you feel we can act on the individual level, both socially and politically, to do the most to fix this problem? I guess that's kind of a big question.
It is, but you see that with regard to climate change, we know who are the major polluters. We know who are suffering the most. We know what needs to be done. But we also know that there are huge movements that are emerging as a result of collective concerns of many. I attended many of these annual conferences known as COP conferences, which are the annual conference on climate change. This is, by the way, becoming the biggest international conference on annual basis as it relates to anything. In this case, it relates to an issue that millions and perhaps billions of people are showing extreme concern and interest around it, which is climate change. I was about 10 years ago in the Copenhagen conference. In the conference hall, we had 5,000 representatives of governments. We had about 5,000 representatives of academia, and maybe 10,000 representatives of private sectors and civil societies working with governments, and 100,000 people out in the streets, pressuring all of us to do more. And you see this phenomena repeating itself at a variety of sizes. Some other conferences like in Cancun or in South Africa or in Qatar, Doha, or in Lima, Peru, or in Poland, or in Morocco. These are conferences that took place during the course of the last 10 years. You see sometimes larger number, smaller number. It depends on capabilities of individuals and activists in their capability of participating. I can tell you that there is a global trend of millions and millions of people who are concerned about that, and they are very active, not necessarily attending this conference, the conferences that I refer to, but in each and every country there are coalitions, there are activities on campuses, among organizations, among communities, among faith-based organizations, churches, and what have you. So issues related to climate change are not isolated small issues. They are including many people. In fact, now even in high schools and middle schools, there are now coalitions and activities to the kids educating their parents in their neighborhoods not to have a plastic pollution. For example, don't drink bottles of plastic water anymore. Try to have your own steel container. Don't have a single use of plastic use. I was in Antigua recently with the officials and the president of the General Assembly, in which there was a huge concert where artists from all corners of the globe participated in this concert, propagating against single use of plastic use. We had another activity after that in the United Nations against it. And I am trying to tell my granddaughter, who is in 5th grade, to have a movement in her middle school against plastic use, of single plastic use. Don't allow grocery stores to give you plastic to take your groceries. Take your cloth bags. Go to in front of these supermarkets, donate these bags for people to start using them. All these things and million more activities of that nature are happening. It's a massive movement. So therefore, that movement is going to influence those who are in government, who think that science is fiction when it comes to climate change. Science is not fiction. Science is telling us climate change is a real thing, and we need to do something about it. And thanks to countries and companies that are pioneers, I'll give you an example, like Volvo, for example, decided as of January 1st, 2018, not to produce a single car using fossil fuel energy. All of their cars are electric cars. Now, all other companies are going to follow steps. If Detroit is going to be lagging behind, that's the problem of Detroit. In few years, you're not going to see but electric cars, cars running on liquid gas. People are becoming very conscious that we need to do things. We need to reduce the amount of emission, and cars are a major producer, along with factories that use coal for their energy, especially in countries like China, some European countries, and there is massive pressure on them that in the next 5 to 10 years not to use coal in any form or shape, and hopefully in the next 10 years you will not see cars using diesel or using fossil fuel energy. In fact, some countries are buying back cars. They say that if you have a car that uses diesel, the government will buy it from you in the next, let's say, 3 to 4 years. They want to take them out of the street. These are good steps that should be supported, and each and every one of us can do something in that regard. I just used the example of plastic bags that often we used to have, when you go to the grocery store. I was stunned to know some statistics. If you go to the UN and there is a photo exhibit that would last for 1 month, that we pollute in the vicinity of 1 trillion plastic bag of a single use every year. 1 trillion. And now many of these plastic bags that we throw, they tend to be in the ocean, and they tend to be around islands in the oceans, and they are damaging the fish in the ocean, because some of the fish, they eat that stuff and it does not decompose. A plastic bottle, if you throw it in the ocean for 200 years, it will not decompose. It will remain as is. So therefore we need to clean all that stuff, because as we grow in population, and by the year 2050 we might be close to 10 billion in population. Where is going to be one of the major sources of our food? It has to be from the oceans.
Yeah.
And if we contribute to damaging the food in the ocean, especially fish, then we are not helping ourselves to sustain our life, especially if we want to maintain a certain quality of life for humans. So there are a lot of things that could be done, and it is not that each and every individual cannot do anything. Even if you don't start using plastic bottles to drink water, that's a huge step in the right direction. And tell everyone around you not to use plastic bags for shopping, that's another huge step. I'm just giving examples.
Go ahead.
I just, on the same topic, today we learned a little bit about what Vermont is doing in terms of organic agriculture, or the use of organic methods. And how do you see that organic agriculture, especially methods that are used in Vermont, could be helpful to other countries, and especially Palestine?
For many of our countries, traditionally when people have food the old ways, I believe it was organic. I grew up in my country, I never heard of organic. Everything was organic. Because when we used to go to the market, my family every day or every other day, they buy all the fruits and vegetables fresh from the market. And that they have chicken or goats, or we used to have milk or something, around us, or somebody, one of the neighbors who have a cow or 3 goats, they used to milk it fresh, come knocking on the door and deliver it fresh. We thought that everything was fresh. And that's a healthy way. I assume that before the evolution of this concept, organic, that everything was organic. But then with larger production of things, pesticides came into the picture, larger production needed, and you need to move faster, you need to make things bigger, therefore you have to give them chemicals and what have you. Then this idea of stuff that is not organic became a big issue. Organic, not organic. And then organic became a new concept in which you demand, I want to have organic food. Of course it is very expensive. And expensive, only strata of the population can afford to buy such an expensive material. Now, through my discussion with today in Vermont, I learned a lot of things. That some of the things that could be done in an organic way, they are not only expensive in terms of the things that you need to provide to them. Like, for example, if you want to have organic milk from goats, if you don't have large, farms, in order to be able to afford to buy the feeds that is organic, then you will be forced to resort to other methods if you have, let's say, 40 or 50 or 100 goats. To me, that while I was excited about learning more about organic agriculture in Vermont, I'm beginning to think in many countries in Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia, they don't have these capabilities of building something so big in order really to sustain that form of organic, let's say, milk and cheese from goats. That doesn't mean that, organic limited agriculture of peas or cauliflower or the few things that we saw in the farm when we visited with you, these things could be doable, in many of our countries because they are relatively at a smaller scale. So these things could be, organic. It's for the better health of the people who will use them in our countries. And if we manage to produce larger portion of it, then it is an attractive product to sell to the north instead of us buying from the north. And usually the north can pay the prices for organic food that we can create in our country. So that what I'm saying that, the more you dig deeper into this issue, it is not as simple as one might think as it appears. There are complications. Some of it could be doable. Some of it, it's not. Other methods that we are using in our countries, but we never thought of it, but now it is being introduced of not a single use of the piece of land of a crop, or not using for grazing the same area all the time and rotating and moving. Our shepherds from the beginning of time, they just move with the weather. If it is cold, they go to the higher areas, they graze, everything is open. When it gets cold, they go to the lower places where it's warmer. So naturally, they were not grazing in limited enclosed areas, as you see sometimes some of the farms here where you put fences and your cows are there, and therefore their activities are limited. They are always on that farm. The land is not open as maybe like in the Wild West in the old days where they can go and graze as they wish. So that in our primitive traditions, there were no restrictions of changing, the grazing of animals. So that is a blessing in itself. But if we start having restrictions, then we might run into some of the problems that you went through them and now you moved beyond. So it's a fascinating area of learning, and maybe some of the techniques that you are gradually phasing yourself out of to a new techniques. For us, some of our countries, they could benefit of some of your previous stage or 2 stages that could be of benefit for us for a while, and knowing also how you phased yourself out of it to a new stage, we could also learn that, so in order to be ready for it. So it's not a simple subject, but the beauty of knowledge and spreading knowledge, we learn from each other. And then, if you run into some big problems through the transition from one stage to another stage, maybe we don't have through the same problems, we can avoid some of it, we can find shortcuts based on your experience, and that is wonderful in terms of exchanging experiences and cooperating by telling us about the lessons that you went through, so that maybe to avoid some of these lessons. And it's not our destiny that we have to repeat exactly some of the things that you did and you discovered that they were not productive, and you phased yourself out of it. So that there are many remarkable things that we can learn from each other. I guess this group is not interested in politics, which is good. Yes, ma'am.
Waiting to ask you. We know that it's very difficult to persuade people not to build in floodplains or in their houses near forests that will ignite. And how do you deal with the small islands that maybe can't be rescued when they are sovereign nations because of the rise in waters?
You see that for the islands themselves and for us as an international community, we do not accept to leave anyone behind. Even the poorest, smallest island that is part of our international community. And I can give you many examples. Grenada, Solomon Islands, Micronesia. These are countries that the population might be 30,000 or 40,000. Very tiny islands with hardly any resources. To be left to drown in the ocean, and as if that it's of no concern to me, no concern to you, but we don't accept that philosophy. These are of concern to us, and we will do everything that we can in order to provide for them what they need in order to have adaptation, not to sink and not to be destroyed.
So you don't, we've seen people over history leave areas where the rivers silted up and they couldn't have trade. We've seen Native American tribes leave areas where there was no more water resources. You're not considering helping these people relocate.
Well, you see that in the old days, they did not have the options that we have today. They did not have in the old days, for example, the United Nations. They did not have international law. They did not have international agreements that we negotiate and we agreed to. They did not have a collective approach of dealing with issues. So these things in the past were dealt with on the basis of accepting your fate or relocating. But if I am, a citizen of Grenada, where am I supposed to go? If the proposition for me is out of kindness, the United States or Canada would say that we will accept all of you, and in order really just to accept the fate that Grenada will drown, morally that is not acceptable. But having said that, let's take the Pacific Islands. One of the biggest islands in the Pacific and most populated and more prosperous is Fiji. Fiji made a contract with all the islands around them. If catastrophe to hit, and you cannot be saved by staying in your countries, you are welcome to come to Fiji. And Fiji is a member of our group, and all these island states are members of our group. This is a unique situation. Now, I am sure that in the Caribbean, if something of that nature happens, and some population from any of the islands in the Caribbean face a calamity of that magnitude, and they run into to try to be saved into another island, they will be helped by others. When Haiti was hit with the thing that they were hit with, many islands around them, including the Dominican part of Hispaniola, which is the same island that they share with them, they came to their rescue and helped as much as possible to save those who remained. So humans are capable of being remarkable and being helpful, and humans are capable of being cruel and unhelpful and contribute to the demise of others. We are at the United Nations, at least morally, and also in terms of our articulation, we are in the business of helping each other, especially the vulnerable. And these principles were taught to us by religion, by what did Jesus Christ told us? Help the poor, help the vulnerable, help those who are in need of things. So these fabulous ideas were taught to us thousands of years ago. It's us whether we live up to these principles or whether we will be so cruel to wage wars and to kill millions from each other in some nonsensical wars, but some of us justify it, or some of us embark on savage methods of dealing with things by eliminating large number of us because they disagree with them or they have certain ideological position vis-a-vis them. Unless there is a lady before you,
Okay, sorry.
or not a lady, a man.
No, that's,
Okay, go ahead.
I'm asking the question because we didn't talk about politics, so I hope that's okay. But I think in a couple of weeks, there might be some kind of negotiations or dealing with the Middle East, and just wondering, you think sustainable agriculture could be any part of that?
If you're referring to this workshop in Bahrain, Manama, of what is about economic solution to the conflict in the Middle East, I believe that that workshop most likely will not amount into much for the following reasons. One, the conflict in the Middle East is not only conflict about economic issues. It is more of resolving the conflict politically. And resolving the conflict politically would require the implementation of the global consensus. The global consensus, as one sees it in many resolutions adopted at the UN, that Israel has to withdraw from the land that it occupied in 1967, which is 22% of mandated or historic Palestine, and to allow for the independence of the state of Palestine, living side by side with the state of Israel in peace and harmony. That's what should be happening. And if that is to happen, then economic issues or projects or cooperation would follow naturally to allow for the sustainability of that political solution. But you can think of many economic projects as you wish, but if you deny people dignity and freedom to live in their own state, then you are not providing them with a sustainable solution. So that's one reason. The other reason is what happened in Israel. Netanyahu won the election but failed to form a coalition government. And there is going to be another election in September. So to have this meeting in Manama, the Israelis are in chaos because of another election within a span of 3 months. The Palestinians feel that those who are proposing this meeting, and by that I mean the Trump administration, they're not credible because they punish the Palestinians economically. They denied paying $300 million to UNRWA, to the agency that pays money to the Palestine refugees until there is a political solution. And the Trump administration stopped paying $28 million to hospitals in East Jerusalem that takes care of Palestinian children and women and the sick, and also denied the $400 million package of aid to the Palestinian National Authority. So what do you believe? What is more credible? The action of the United States, which punished the Palestinian people during the course of last year by close to $800 million, or the promises that they are circulating, come to Manama, Bahrain, to discuss an economic package to bring paradise to Palestine. If you want to bring paradise, well, pay the money to UNRWA, to the refugees, or to the hospital in East Jerusalem, or to those who are in need of these things. Because of all these things, I don't think that this conference, if it is going to take place, this workshop, which is supposed scheduled to take place around the 25th of this month, It's conceivable that it might not take place, but if it takes place, it would be similar to the conference that was organized last year in the White House. They invited countries to come to discuss prosperity in Gaza. That was the invitation and the suggestion by the Trump administration. You want to have prosperity in Gaza and you cut off $300 million to the refugee agency that caters on daily basis to more than 1 million refugees in Gaza. The World Food Organization feeds refugees in Gaza every day, 1 million of them, because there is food insecurity. And when you put 2 million people in a blockaded area, such as the Gaza Strip, which is a tiny area, for 13 years continuously, and closing their airspace, and sometimes you allow the fishermen to fish, and most of the time you don't allow them to fish, and you don't allow for the access and movement of goods and people and services in and outside Gaza. If you want really to help the people in Gaza, the issue was before them last year in the White House, is lift the blockade against, the Gaza Strip. So they met, some of them talked, some did not, some hesitated to express an opinion, and the following day as if nothing happened. Have you heard of anything that happened in the White House of that economic meeting on trying to bring prosperity to the Gaza Strip? So most likely if this Bahrain meeting to take place, if it is going to take place, then it is very conceivable that it will produce the nothing that was produced after the meeting in the White House of last year. Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's very discouraging, and we all have seen it. I mean, it's like, it's not opaque anymore. We know what's going to happen. And sometimes I wonder if what's going to happen is exactly what they want to happen, to continue to maintain the phrase, that nobody gets along with anybody, so what are we going to do? But I don't want to get into that. I just want to ask you, and this is almost difficult, how would you answer it? What you've said is very powerful, and what the G77 and China are trying to do is really important. How can somebody in Vermont look at this political question and deal with it politically so that we can assist you, so that we can make the goals that you have a reality? To have a global awareness that we're all in this together, etc., and to promote your goals, to speak, to give a voice to your goals. How can we do that?
Well, if you're referring, to the whole idea of the Group of 77 and China and the global agenda as it relates, to development as we see it at the UN. Vermont, you are one of the most progressive states in the United Nations. Your officials, including your senators, are in the forefront of defending the UN and demanding from the US government, to pay their dues, because you are $1.3 billion lacking in your dues to the UN. And also you are considering cutting off another $800 million to the peacekeeping budget of the United Nations. Paying money to keep peace in many of the African countries by financing peacekeepers there is a good thing. I think Senator Leahy, if I'm not mistaken, is a champion of defending the UN and asking the United States to continue its commitment towards the United Nations. Senator, Sanders is a very progressive senator. During the campaign of last time for the presidency, he was among the courageous ones advocating a just solution to the Palestine question on the basis of the two-state solution. So you are doing already a lot. You are putting them in office, so I assume that you are supporting their policies. So for me personally, Vermont, it's not an accident to come to it. I like those officials, and I hope that when we come back in August, that we will be able to meet with them. The governor, the lieutenant governor is amazing. I was told stories about him saying things that are, what did he say, that he wants to put who in jail, you know?
They turned down pharmaceutical company.
He said instead of, you know, of buying a medicine that is so expensive and so dangerous to us, that the people that need to be put in jails, those are the owners of these companies that are making billions of dollars, you know, in having all, you know, they're getting away with murder in terms of the money that they make and the restrictions that they impose on us and not having affordable, you know, medicine. So you are very progressive in that sense, and I am sure that, you know, in one day I learned so much about the community things that you do, of how you help each other. You don't allow a kid to go, you know, hungry, you know, you give them things to go to school. These are wonderful things that, you know, that those who come encounter with you, especially from the United Nations, from countries like the countries that I mentioned, they will be thrilled to hear these stories of how good the people of Vermont, and hope. I'm sure that, you know, almost all Americans are of the same kind. We might have disagreement with your current federal administration because it is doing, you know, a lot of things that is harming many people. But we know the kind nature of the American people. You know, you tell them the story as is, and they tend, you know, to be supportive to just causes. We know that, at least I'm talking of my experience. Anywhere I go and I speak, whether in churches, in libraries, or to college students, you know, you explain the story of justice, the story of unfairness, and, you know, the sympathy of the American people is with the people who are vulnerable, and they support just causes. Some of your officials are wonderful. Some of your officials, especially in Washington, D.C., they have other ideas that are not conducive to the collective approach that we have at the UN in promoting justice. And here I'm speaking about, for example, the question of Palestine. The U.S. administration all along was trying to play a role of being even-handed, to mediate between us and the Israelis. This administration came and gave the Israeli occupying authority Jerusalem for free, removed it off the table. And the refugees removed it off the table. The Golan Heights for free, remove it from the table, and so on. And they participated in making international law in the Security Council of the United Nations, in saying that any legal changes of the status of Jerusalem is null and void and has no legal effect. This is what the Security Council resolution states, and the United States of America participated in making it happen. The same thing with the Golan Heights as example. So this administration to come to disrespect international law and Security Council resolution that they helped to put in place is not congruent with respecting international law and the UN itself, which the United States of America played a leading role in establishing. So that's the reality, you know. We differentiate between those who are fair and advocating a correct policy to advance justice, and those who are trying maybe to please others, even if it is at the expense of international law and their obligations. But that's part of our pain. But, you know, don't be misled by me. You know, I represent people who suffer tremendously, but I am proud of the fact that I am leading 135 nations for the goodness of humanity. That is, you know, it gives me strength in order to serve the just cause of the Palestinian people in the best possible way. So I'm not depressed. On the contrary, I am fighting harder for this just cause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.